Welcome to the newsroom. Live with Hope on the scene. Our host, Hope.
I'm Hope on the scene. Hello, my name is Hope. I'm here with Jeremy Lechner.
Hey Hope, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Tell me about PTSD and what it is.
Well, Hope, PTSD is a fascinating condition, and it's been an epidemic actually happening all throughout our nation. And honestly, it's just really sad. What happens is that soldiers, they will go to war and they will have some sort of traumatic experience because it's post-traumatic stress disorder. So it takes place after the fact, where they walk away from a battle scene. They walk away from seeing some sort of tragedy happen to somebody in front of them and they can't do anything about it. They are flying a drone and so they're not actually there, but they kill all these people, and all of a sudden they end up feeling all of this remorse and they have this psychological traumatic experience and they no longer know what to do with it. You know, the fascinating thing about trauma is that trauma just means unprocessed pain. And so the reality about trauma is that trauma can just at any point just come out and get you. And so the thing is, like, they've actually done studies with cellular memory, and they found that, you know, we actually store our memories, our subconscious memories, in our cells. So there was an interesting incident that took place with a person who they had a heart transplant, and they could remember the murder of the person who they'd received their heart from. It's just like crazy, because I guess they found that, you know, the stomach, it's the second brain, and the heart is the third brain, and all throughout your different organs you actually store memories throughout. And the reality is our subconscious memory, our lens of the world, is so much more powerful than our conscious memory. So what happens is that we end up seeing the world in a fascinating light that really doesn't have all that much to do with our present conception of how we see things. It's not necessarily about how we think. It's actually more so about our experience that is stored all throughout our body in memories, cellular memories, and it ends up coming up at random points where we all of a sudden just realize, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm freaking out. Why am I freaking out? When we look deeper underneath the surface, we find out that actually what has happened is that we've had a traumatic experience that we're being triggered by. All of a sudden something in life triggers us, and this is what's happening with the people with post-traumatic stress disorder, where all of a sudden these traumatic experiences will be triggered in their memory, their subconscious memory, and they'll just start freaking out because they have all these unprocessed, these traumatic experiences that just start hitting them. And so they'll be like in a movie with their wife, and all of a sudden they'll see a war scene that reminds them of what they were in, the situation they were in, or something traumatic of that nature, and all of a sudden they lose it. They freak out. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what's going on. And I had the pleasure of talking with my friend that is a neurosurgeon in Mexico this summer. And he had fascinating things to tell me about the brain. And basically, it's this guy's passion to study and research about the brain, as well as to operate on the brain. And he was telling me that people with post-traumatic stress disorder, they still believe they're there when they have these triggered events. So they'll be just like going through life, and all of a sudden it'll just like overtake them. This trauma will just overtake them. It'll literally, like, this stored memory can like be stored in their organs, and it can just like come up to the surface as they're triggered by this sort of thing. And it can physically manifest. It can create all sorts of physical issues, having trauma that you don't know what to do with. Like, if it's trauma that somehow gets stored in like your liver, you can have a liver issue. It's just bizarre. But they all of a sudden, let's say they're having a night terror, they're having this terrible dream, it'll just start to surface, and out of nowhere they'll start freaking out. They'll start freaking out and not being in control, because they will still think that they're at war. My friend was just telling me, this neurosurgeon, that, you know, it's fascinating because they can't do anything about it. They can't control it. The brain is not in control of where it's at, and so they just lose it. They lose it and go crazy.
Do you have PTSD?
You know, I'm recovered from PTSD. I actually experienced PTSD pretty severely this summer. It was pretty awful. And when I say severely, it's not like at the extent of these veterans, but I actually had a life-threatening situation this summer in Texas. I was at my uncle's ranch in Houston, and I had just decided I'm going to go on a run. I haven't run in a while. I was really excited about it. It was a perfect day to run. I go out, and on my way back, I was actually, ironically, surrounded and attacked by 4 different pit bulls. And these 4 pit bulls surrounded me and bit me and scratched me and held me up for a full 30 minutes. Now, it's kind of I outsmarted them, and I think it's kind of funny because I the place I got bit was on the butt. And so now I have this nasty scar. But walking away from that incident of being held up for 30 minutes, I would go on walks throughout the summer, and I couldn't like handle life. I like was really frustrated and anxious, and to make it worse, I worked 70 to 80 hours a week on average for 3 months, so it was a really hard time. But while having PTSD, it's not exactly ideal, but my business grew, I think, like it multiplied 10 times the size in a matter of like a few weeks. So I had no choice. But essentially, I walked away with PTSD, and it was really hard to function. I just at times like wouldn't be able to think straight, or I just want to like punch something out of nowhere, and I was all of a sudden I would see a dog and I'd have shortness of breath, and it was really crazy. Honestly, the only thing that I really found comfort in was holding my little dog, and ironically, my little Jack, he's a schnoodle and he's beautiful, and then just spending time working through some techniques that some Christian counselors have taken me through and working through the unprocessed pain.
So, who has canines and volunteers help out?
So, Canines for Veterans is a really amazing organization that I just got connected with, and they absolutely are making a difference. What they do is they don't just help people, they help dogs, because they have all these dogs that are at high risk for being killed. I think it's horrible that in our culture we kill dogs. And so there are all these different dogs that they get put into the shelter, the pound, and what they do with them is they kill them and they burn them. And so I had the pleasure today of getting connected with the owner and founder, Michael Tarantino, and basically Rhino. I apologize. It's those Italian names. They're hard to say, but you just got to own it. But basically, I got connected with him and just really got to pick his brain about this and learn more. But essentially, yeah, the reality is that you can not only help veterans that are in risky situations, because if you have PTSD, you can end up attacking your wife because you think she's the enemy in the middle of the night. So you'll end up like, there's been terrible, horrible stories about wives just being harmed by their husbands, and the husbands think that they're an Iraqi terrorist because they get back from Iraq and don't know what to do or how to function or process it. And so what Canines for Veterans is doing is they are connecting people with dogs that they're pulling out of the shelter. These dogs are otherwise going to be killed and burnt. And essentially what they do is they bring them to their home operation base in Chicago, and they end up training them for weeks. And they bring the owners in the week. Owners will have to come in 3 times a week to do intensive training with these dogs. And they thoroughly train them. They prepare them. They walk them through the process of being connected, and it's just wonderful what they do, because what happens is these dogs, they are trained in such a specific way that say they're having like a night terror, the dog will in the middle of the night be able to sense what's happening to the owner, and they will jump in the bed in the middle of, like, let's say they have a partner like a wife, and they'll jump in the middle of the wife and the man, so it'll wake up the wife, it'll wake up the man, the dog will start like licking the man and just be there to comfort him and encourage him and bring him through that hard time and that trauma. Also, what ends up happening is that the dogs, they can actually smell the pheromones that are coming forth from a man as he's about to have like a seizure, and they can literally like help him to snap out of it. They can like prepare him for it. They can alert them to like what's going on, and it's just fascinating the ability that these dogs have to really make a tangible and practical impact in these men's lives.
What can we do to help?
Well, what you can do to help, honestly, there's a few different things. Practically, the first thing that I would propose, and this is being a pastor and basically a counselor to so many people I can't even count, what I would highly recommend is just be present with these people. When I had PTSD, the last thing in the world that I wanted was for somebody to just try to tell me stop it or just shake it off. Like, I can't. I literally got... I'm struggling. Like, I can't just stop and snap out of it. And so one thing, just be present. Just love the person in front of you. And so I would just recommend just be present and just care for them and listen to them. Even if you don't understand, listen for their benefit. The other thing that I would say, and this is probably the most important thing, is that, if you take the time, if you take a whole 20 seconds right now, go to the website. Go to the website, Canines for Veterans. Hope is going to post the link in the description, but go there. Go to caninesforveteransnfp.org, and you will end up being able to find all these different ways to help veterans. That is what you need. That is what these people need, is people that are informed, that understand and are there to care and love and be a helping hand in the midst of it. And the best resource for that is, like I said, caninesforveteransnfp.org.
Thank you for coming out here, Jeremy.
Absolutely. Hey, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.